It's just after noon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, 1 Second Ahead, Using Mindfulness to Transform Leadership Effectiveness, presented by Mary Beth Sigler. My name is Maggie Almarakbi, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career Programs for Alumni Career and Affinity Programs here at the University of Chicago. Our office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and support the alumni community through career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. It's my privilege to introduce you to our presenter today, UChicago Booth School of Business alumna Mary Beth Sigler. Mary Beth is a 1995 graduate of the Booth School of Business and is currently a senior consultant to the Potential Project, a global organization that has delivered corporate-based mindfulness training in Fortune 500 companies in more than 22 countries. She is also an experienced leadership and executive coach with more than 20 years of experience coaching executives and their teams. She works with senior leaders, managers, and high potentials to develop greater professional effectiveness and the leadership tools needed to successfully advance their careers. She specializes in emotional intelligence and mindful leadership, and she is also a professor at New York University in the area of leadership and human capital. Leaders today face an increasing amount of pressure to do more with less and get more done in less time. Yet the key to enhancing your leadership performance is not to speed up, but instead to slow down and use mindful leadership to be more effective. Today's webinar will look at how we can enhance our leadership performance and well-being through mindfulness. Now, let's get to the reason you've all joined today, and let me welcome Mary Beth.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you to everybody for coming. I am going to put my webcam on just for a second. Okay, I hope it's on. I can't see myself, but I hope you can see me. Just to say hello, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to share this material with you today. It's near and dear to my heart because while mindfulness in the corporate space is gotten very common over the last few years, when I was at the beginning of my corporate career, it was unheard of, and it's something that I think would have absolutely helped me be more effective and more successful throughout my career if I had had these tools back then. So I love to share this with you, and I love to do this work and all of the work that I do with the Potential Project and with my coaching clients. So that said, let me turn off my webcam so we can put attention on the slides. And let's take a look at, well, first I'd like to actually ask you, what is your intention for joining us today? Oops. So think about for a second, there we go. What are your objectives for joining on this webinar? What would you like to get out of it? I hope that I can answer questions that you might have, but maybe just think a few seconds about what brought you to this topic. Is there something about the leadership topic or specifically mindful leadership that you were interested in? And so really the basis for this topic, mindful leadership, 1 second ahead. So mindful leadership is about ensuring that we do the right things as to just opposed to doing a lot of things. It's about ensuring we are managing not just our activities, but our minds. And within that space, remaining focused, calm, and clear, even in the face of demanding business environments. And really that the work around mindful leadership that we do at the Potential Project is that the key to becoming a successful leader starts with learning to understand and manage your thoughts. And this gives you the ability to take a 1 second pause. So here's where the 1 second ahead comes in. It's about taking a 1 second pause to respond to situations as opposed to reacting on autopilot. Mindfulness training is an ancient technique designed to help enhance focus and awareness. And when it's skillfully applied to today's demanding business environments and within the context of leadership today, it can be a key to enhancing performance, well-being, and greater results. But it really all starts with understanding the nature of our attention. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today are, we're going to look at why managing attention today is particularly difficult. We're going to look at the neuroscience of attention and managing the mind. We'll take a look at some research and what research says about mindfulness. And then we'll move into the leadership space and take a look at our leadership model and we'll do a short mindfulness practice. This work, just before we get into it, is based on a book written by Rasmus Hugard, who founded the Potential Project, called 1 Second Ahead. It's a very simple but thorough look at corporate mindfulness. So if anybody's interested in diving into that, I highly recommend it. And these are some of the companies that we do work with globally. Okay, so in the context of today, leaders today face an increasing amount of pressure to do more with less and get more done in less time. They're confronted with what we call the paid reality. It's an increasingly complex, ever-changing business landscape. They're expected to be always on and are often overloaded with information. They have to face challenges in work environments that are filled with distractions and pressured, right? So in our experience, leaders who allow themselves to fall victim to this paid reality do not do well. They don't perform well. They don't act as effective leaders because they're often overwhelmed, overworked, stressed, and ineffective at leading their people and delivering results. Quite often, the reason for their poor performance is that they respond to the paid reality by going on autopilot, which is a typical human response. And they simply try to do more, run faster, or work longer. And I wonder if some of this may sound familiar to you. When faced with the pressures of today, we often try to do more, do it faster, and maybe work longer hours. But conversely, the way to succeed in a paid reality is not by speeding up. The key to succeeding in the paid reality and actually enhancing leadership in this context is by slowing down. It's about remaining focused, calm, and clear in demanding business environments. And that's where the 1 second ahead comes in. It's finding that 1 second space where we can find the calm, the focus, and the clarity to succeed. So let's take a look at the neuroscience of that. Specifically, the brain today that we have is the brain that we've had for many, many millions of years through humans, but it's really an industrial brain, right? So if we look at the typewriter on the left-hand side, our brains are used to functioning with the ability to focus on one thing. And that's really was the work context for many, many years. But work life has changed radically over the past few decades. While we used to have working conditions in which we could focus attention more easily, today we don't, right? We have all these distractions, we have information overload, and our attention constantly has demands on it. Some of us try to multitask by switching through these, and if you were with me on last year's mindfulness webinar, we talked about multitasking a lot. For purposes of today, we're not going to go too deep into multitasking, except I'll tell you that research shows that multitasking is ineffective and it uses up the vital resources of the brain, the brain that we need to focus and produce results with. And if we think about our work day to day, where we need to make and execute decisions, we can understand why that attention on the right-hand side as it's presented, if it's fragmented across many different things, why that fragmented attention can actually be a poison pill to effectiveness and a fast track to making mistakes. If we've ever sent an email too quickly and realized we hit copy all instead of copying just one person on it and maybe had some information in there that we didn't intend, we can understand what that might look like, how we react when we're rushed and when we're distracted. And some really key research has shown that attention is a limited resource. Of the 11 million bits of information that the nervous system can process, we're only consciously aware of 40. So 40 out of 11 million bits. And if we think about distractions and what they do to us, that short amount that is actually conscious in our attention, the less focus we have, the less we can process vital information, and the less ability we have to control our attention. So focused attention is really the building block for any sort of complex learning, decision-making, thinking, and creating. And this has been understood over time through many, many research studies. But focused attention is also really the key to business success now. So in the words of Accenture, Managing attention is now the single most important determinant of business success. So let's take a look at why they say that. Research has shown that our ability to pay attention specifically has been dropping over time, and it's dropping over time because of the paid reality. So as the distractions, the technologies, the need to be always on have increased, our attention has decreased. And this specifically comes from an HBO article entitled Overloaded Circuits, Why Smart People Underperform by Edward Halloway. And we're going to take a little quiz here to show what that number actually is that the mind wanders. So if you'd like to send some answers in the questions box, or just think to yourself, what percentage of the time do you think your mind wanders on average, or do you think the human mind wanders on average? And the answer? So 46.9, 47 essentially, 47% of the time, the mind's natural tendency is to wander. It's off task, right? So at work, what that means is 53% of the time, our mind is on task. The rest of the time, it's not. And from a leadership perspective, there's a lot of potential to be developed here. Even just a small increase in on-task time could have a significant improvement in many aspects of leadership as well as just daily work effectiveness, right? Including our productivity, employee satisfaction, teamwork, and anything else that benefits from a more focused attention. And a little lighthearted look at what that looks like. Dilbert, a resident philosopher, I think it's, we can all relate to this, where we're having a conversation with somebody, they're distracted by their technology, we might be distracted by technology, and as a result, we both completely lose focus. So let's bring this back again to the attention economy. So we had heard that quote from Accenture on how important it was for us to be able to pay attention in order to produce business results. And let's take a look at what that looks like more specifically. So traditionally, the context of business productivity, if you've studied it, right, it's been about enhancing our time management, goal setting, prioritization, how we structure our days, what we do first thing in the morning, and things like that. And that's represented on the bottom, like the x-axis, if you will. But in the paid economy, in the paid reality, attention is becoming the new foundational skill for productivity and for leadership, right? No one actually can manage time, per se. What we can do is manage our attention in time. And just to give you an example of that, right? You might manage time by allocating an hour to work on an important project. But if your phone keeps ringing, your email notifications are going off, and people are interrupting you by coming into your office, what have you actually done, right? Your attention was not focused for the hour, and as a result, your productivity suffered. So we very much want to balance our prioritization and practical time management approaches with calm, clear, and focused attention. And that's where the mindfulness will come in. So we've talked about the paid reality. We've talked about the studies that have shown that ability to pay attention is dropping. And we've now said, well, we need to be able to pay attention, right? To be productive, to be effective, and to find results. There is good news in all of this, right? Training the attentional muscle, right? The brain is very much like a muscle. It's like going to the gym. The more we train our focus and our attention, the stronger it gets. And that's why mindfulness as a practice is best done on a daily basis. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. But the key is to know that we can, and you can, enhance your attentiveness to the task at hand, to the people in front of you, the people you're leading. And that enhancement, that improvement in your attention specifically does come from mindfulness. It comes from training your brain to focus. Mindfulness is based on thousands of years of development. It's a rigorous practice of enhancing focus and finding clarity of mind while opening the eyes to the potential in ourselves and the world. It's a practice of mental high performance, so to speak, right? And in many ways, it's a long-awaited answer to the challenges of today's fast-paced and information overload reality. And I think this is the key to why mindfulness has very much become so relevant to today's business environments and why we see so much attention being placed on mindfulness in the leadership and in the work environment. So what does it look like to actually train your brain? If you know anything about the neuroscience of the brain, you might understand the concept of neuroplasticity, right? Decades of research shown that our brains are changeable. This basically means our brains can change over time. And specifically, our brains change over time based on the way that we use them. So this graphic is essentially showing you new neural pathways being formed in the brain. And new neural pathways form in the brain based on how we use our brains. Any action we do or thought we think creates new neural pathways. And it makes it easier to repeat those actions. So if you multitask a lot, while multitasking is actually very detrimental to our effectiveness, if you do it often, you will get better at it. Mindfulness or multitasking has some serious downsides. But the concept is still there. If we do something repeatedly, we do get better at it. Mindfulness is the counterpart to that. The more we practice focusing our mind, the more we will actually get better at it. And this is really important to what we're trying to say today, which is we are not predefined by what we are now, right? We can recreate ourselves based on what you do now. If you've ever studied habits or high performance routines, I think you understand the concept of things that you do on a regular basis with focused attention specifically on those. Those are things that tend to impact our lives on the long term, possibly the most. So even 10 minutes a day given to a mindfulness practice could have significant long-term effects. And so what this really means is that every moment we spend with a focused and clear mind, focus and clarity become more embedded traits in the brain. And in the context of the attention economy, this means we're not destined to have a wandering mind. It means we can train ourselves to have more attention. And what does this mean in the context of leadership? This is a quote from McKinsey Quarterly. Information overload and its close cousin, attention fragmentation, hit leaders particularly hard because leaders so badly need uninterrupted time to synthesize information from many different sources, reflect on its implications for the organization, apply judgment, and arrive at good decisions. So I think that makes sense. And I think this is relevant to anybody who operates in a fast-paced business or even educational or nonprofit environment, right? We need time to synthesize information. We have so much information coming at us all the time. And mindfulness in this context can be so helpful because it builds the ability to pay attention. It builds our ability to focus. And as we refine the practice, it builds our ability to combat stress and find clarity. And to build on that, there have been many studies over the years. And more specifically, studies focused on the impact of mindfulness used in a work environment. And this gives you a summary level of some of the studies. So everything next to the up arrow at the top of the slide, improve and increase with the application of mindfulness. And everything with the bottom arrow at the bottom part of the slide, the downward facing arrow, are things that would decrease with an application of mindfulness at work. And this would be typically systematic applications, so not just a one-time intervention. It would be over a period of 4 or 6 or 8 weeks at a minimum, over time measuring the impact for 10 to 20 minutes a day of practice. And this is, in addition to this, there's really just an impressive list of research on the mind and body outside of the work context, I didn't include the slides. There are so many that we have, but some of the byproducts include a stronger immune system, lower blood pressure, reduced stress, better sleep, improved cognitive functioning, and then all of these things that we see here moving into an overall better quality of life and more happiness at work. So to come back to the key essential theme of mindfulness, as we distill it down, mindfulness is really about managing our attention. It's being able to focus on the task at hand despite the distractions that are around us. And it's learning to manage and build that attention. And specifically, our approach to mindfulness training includes helping leaders and individuals enhance focus and awareness, two critical skills for today's leaders. Focus is about training the mind to maintain sharp focus on a particular task, what's in front of you, with minimal distraction, for as long as you want, with minimal effort. So that it's easy to hold your focus on something. And then awareness, the second part of that, is about training the mind to be open and see clearly what is happening internally and externally and make wise choices about where to focus your attention. So focus and attention are how we at the Potential Project really talk about mindfulness. And we'll take a look at that, how that plays into leadership as we start to move into the leadership model. But before we look at the leadership model, I'd like to share with you a model of mental effectiveness, and specifically the matrix of mental effectiveness. So as we look at it here, sharp focus is the opposite of distraction. And being openly aware is the opposite of acting on autopilot, where we're not really aware of what's going on. We're just really plowing ahead, not aware. So we can see that the pieces of mindfulness here, the two keys of mindfulness, sharp focus and openly aware. And let's look at how we build out the rest of the matrix, right? So we have 4 quadrants. Quadrant 2 is that mindful space. It's sharp focus plus openly aware, right? In quadrant 1, we're on what we might call a state of flow. We're focused, but we're on autopilot. Your state of mind in this quadrant can be described as absorbed, right? It might happen spontaneously when you do routine tasks. Some people find this when they exercise or when they're doing something that's monotonous. If you've ever driven down the road and your brain is really distracted by something and your car turns, you turn the car in a direction that you typically go but not where you wanted to go, that's sort of the definition of autopilot. We're distracted and we go with what comes most naturally to us as opposed to maybe what we intended. The risk of this absorbed state is that you lack awareness, right? Maybe you're lacking direction. Maybe you're lacking awareness of what's going on in front of you. And in leadership, if you think about applying this, lack of awareness can really mean the difference between picking up on an employee's stress signals or underlying tension and pushing them too far, as one example. It may also mean that you don't notice your own stress. You may be so used to pushing it aside and going, operating in that paid reality to get more done in less time, that may be your constant state of being. Moving into the 4th quadrant, which is what we call the creative space. You are aware, but also distracted. There could be real benefits to loosening focus, right? Moving into a creative space, allowing random thoughts to bubble up. Some people are more creative when they're a little bit distracted. But if your mind is too distracted, you'll have difficulty retaining the good ideas. And good ideas, to really push them forward into innovative solutions, come from bringing focus to them to execute. Right? So it would be moving that creativity up into quadrant 2. The 3rd quadrant is what we call the mindless quadrant. Neither focused nor aware. Not a lot to say, except I hope we're not operating in that space very often. It's not even a relaxing state because typically we're jumping from task to task, thing to thing. and it uses up a lot of the productive energy of the brain in a non-productive way. So that brings us to quadrant 2, which is the mindful quadrant. In this quadrant, we're mindful, right? This is where we're performing at our best. It really hits the sweet spot for clarity, presence, attention, and other qualities of effective leadership. Operating in quadrant 2 is a useful response to the paid reality and the relentless stream of distractions in the attention economy. Sharp focus and open awareness, right? We've talked about those as the foundational skills of mindfulness. But sharp focus and open awareness are also beneficial skills for anyone at any level of an organization, especially at the leadership level, right? And yet many senior leaders go through their day not in tune with what they're doing, why they're doing it, or how they and others around them are feeling. Because they're so busy trying to get a lot done, rushing from meeting to meeting without any time in between to decompress, or just plowing through a relentless stream of emails which never ends. But in this context, it can be very, very difficult to achieve results. It can be very difficult to find focus and awareness about how they're leading themselves and how they're leading others. And this brings us to the mindful leadership model that we use. So if we start up in the upper left, in the green box, that box is actually the mindful state. So what was the upper right box in the matrix? And this is where mindfulness really takes root. It's in that self-awareness, right? And this model very much is inspired, as a side note, by Daniel Goleman's work in emotional intelligence. If you've ever studied emotional intelligence, the foundational part of emotional intelligence is very much self-awareness. And you know, it really helps to explain the challenges that leaders face and how they can be overcome. And hopefully this framework will help you look at what how the cultivation of mindfulness and will enable you and the people around you to be more effective and to be better leaders. So in quadrant 2, in the green box, we have strong focus, we have open awareness directed at our own self. It helps us build our ability to see our thoughts and feelings more clearly. It puts us more in touch with our values and goals. We can mindfully monitor our thoughts and emotions, and we can use our values and goals to guide our actions. This mind state is absolutely prerequisite for everything else that follows. As you develop more self-awareness, you simultaneously can cultivate the ability to have more people awareness. So moving over to the right, to the red box, people awareness. And once we can see and understand our own struggles and challenges, we build our own self-awareness, then we have greater ability to recognize those in the people around us, right? We move from a high degree of mindfulness of self, and we move towards mindfulness of others as a natural transition. We develop more empathy, awareness of individuals, their motivations. We develop more awareness of our teams, how they function effectively, what their strengths are, what their opportunities for development are, and we develop more compassion. And again, once we've developed a high level of self-awareness, so starting again from the self space, the green box, it's easier to move down towards effective self-leadership. This is where we have the discipline to focus on the right things and to take the time to know what those right things are. So in the blue box, we have focus, we have discipline, we have integrity, built on that key piece of self-awareness. And when we're operating in this space, right, we do the right things. They come from tuning in with your authentic self, your authentic leadership, and having a high degree of integrity in everything that you do. And then finally, we push this forward, right, into people leadership. People leadership really comes after we have the foundations of mindfulness of self and others, leadership of self, leadership of others. And that's when this key piece, the people leadership, really can increase into being something that we take on as our own. It's where our strategic and tactical management tools and techniques, such as defining vision and strategy, can really take heart. It's where applying situational leadership can really take root. It's where our strategy and direction get much more strongly founded. And the more we cultivate the skills of self and others, the more we become deeper and better leaders. But all of these really form a dynamic, ongoing, ever-changing development roadmap. And these are the 4 quadrants that really define mindful leadership. And specifically, the mindful leadership piece, going back to that first quadrant, starting with the mindfulness training, moving into specific leadership strategies, mental techniques, and work techniques. And these aren't something that we have tons of time to work on today, but typically these are some of the areas that we look at when we work with individuals and teams. We look at work techniques around emotional balance, mental energy, emails, goals, priorities. We do mindfulness training, which is that very center circle where we build the sharp focus on the open awareness. And we have mental strategies as well, which help support the mindfulness practice itself. Things like balance, letting go, acceptance, presence, beginner's mind. So we could spend a ton of time talking about how all of these interplay. I just wanted to give you a sense for what some of the ideas that underlie the leadership and underlie the application of something like this mindful leadership model. But coming back to the mindful leadership model, specifically as it relates to yourself, is to think about what are your areas of strength as a leader. And if you have a pad and pencil handy, and this is something that maybe you want to jot some notes down while this is fresh in your mind, and some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of attention and focus and awareness are fresh in your mind. So thinking about what are your areas of strength as a leader? What are your opportunities for development as a leader? Looking at those 4 quadrants. And specifically understanding that that self-awareness piece is so critical, so that if we're not doing a good job on understanding and managing our thoughts and feelings and aligning those with values and goals, that the rest of it is really that much more difficult to implement. So maybe starting from that green box, what are some opportunities for development? You might rank yourself 1 through 10 in each of the quadrants. And maybe call out some areas for yourself that you would be low-hanging fruit, or maybe longer-term areas of development that you might want to start to work on in any one of these quadrants. And then the opportunity that presents itself today is to really start a mindfulness practice, which is going to improve self-awareness and really be the foundational basis of this type of self-directed leadership model, mindful leadership model. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And we'll have a chance to practice it, and then we'll have a few minutes to go through some questions and answers that you might have. So mindfulness, the basic mindfulness training as we define it, typically starts with anatomy. It's actually a very simple model. I'll click up the whole model so we can see it. It's ABCD. So it's very simple. We go into a lot of big corporations. It's a very simple model for the people that we work with to remember. It's the ABCD model, right? It starts with anatomy, which means we're sitting comfortably erect, so we're not sleepy and falling asleep. So remember, we're cultivating focus and clarity and awareness. So we need to sit in a place that allows us to do that. So why don't we try to find that now? So even if you're sitting at a desk or sitting in a chair, wherever you are, just sitting nice and tall. We could even see how our posture can shift our ability to pay more attention. Feet are grounded, shoulders, arms, face relaxed. And then when we have that groundedness, we can move into the breath. So we very much use, in our mindfulness training, we use the breath as what builds our focus. So we hold attention on the breath. So we use neutral natural breathing. And just to really drop into that space, you might want to close your eyes or soften your eyes a little bit. And start to tune into your breath, right? You'll notice that bringing your attention to your breath drops you out of your thoughts. Maybe you're noticing the breath at one particular place in the body. Maybe noticing the belly rising and falling. And see if you can hold your attention there for a few breaths, just noticing the breath in the body. And then we build this model by bringing in the idea of counting, the C, right? So counting the breath, inhale, exhale 1, inhale, exhale 2, and moving all the way up to 10. And then when you get to 10, you move back down all the way to 1. Typically what happens as we're counting the breath is that distractions happen. Either something external like a sound, a ding on our phone or a sound outside happens, we get distracted, our mind jumps away from the breath. Or more typically thinking. Thinking is what typically distracts us as we're trying to bring some focus to a mindfulness practice. The idea when distractions happen, as you can see, is just to resume, let it go, not engaging, no judging, just bring it back again to the breath, and then we would resume your counting. You could start again at 1. And the idea of this model, it's very, very simple. We'll try a little 5-minute practice with it. Not as easy to hold focus and awareness as we might think. If we go back to our statistic, 46% of the time, 47% of the time, our mind is wandering. So we think about that pretty quickly in the practice. Our mind wants to wander. And remember, this is about building focus. This is about building our attention. It's about training the mind like a muscle to build our attention, our ability to focus. And then as we work with clients, just as an aside, we do move through different types of mindfulness practice. We work on mindfulness for relaxation. We work on mindfulness for clarity. And then we'll work on some other techniques. But for practices of today, and if you joined the webinar in terms of developing your own self-leadership, and starting with that first quadrant of the leadership model, your own self-awareness, this can be a really great place just to do, a little 10-minute mental workout every day to bring some focus, and you'll notice hopefully some of those side effects that we looked at in terms of the benefits that come as a result of the practice. So if we could all come back to our comfortable, erect seat, let's try a little practice here. We're going to do 5 minutes. Sitting nice and tall. Eyes soft or closed. And let's just get curious about the breath. Bringing attention to your breathing. Naturally inhaling and exhaling. And noticing the breath, maybe noticing it in the body. And whenever you're ready, let's start to build that attentional muscle, the focus, by counting the breath. Inhale and exhale is 1. Inhale, exhale 2, all the way up to 10 and all the way back down to 1. And remembering as distractions happen, just releasing them, returning again to the breath. Staying with the practice, staying focused, aware of the breath. Coming back to the counting, coming back to your focus, releasing distractions. Okay, so starting to come out of the practice. So that was a 5-minute mindfulness practice. And what we typically see when we go into companies is that most people lose track of the counting at about they get to about 3. Some people get to about 6 or 7, and they start to lose focus. So perhaps when we get into the Q&A, if you have any specific questions about the mindfulness practice. But again, a routine like this, it's 10 minutes a day. It's just like if you're used to going to the gym to work out the body, this is the same idea. You're doing a mental workout. It's for your mind. It's a daily routine, just like brushing your teeth. Morning is absolutely the best time to do it, but it's building that attentional muscle. It's building your ability to find focus. It will build your ability to find clarity, and it will build your ability to stay relaxed and calm despite the pressures of the day-to-day work environment. And just as an example, there was a question. We had, some people had sent some questions in advance, and I know we have some time to look at those. One of the questions was on some of the results that we see from this practice in the companies that we work for. So I picked out just one. This was a program that was run in Europe with Accenture, and it gives you an idea for some of the things that we see when we do mindfulness training. So this was 4 90-minute workshops over 2 months. Not a lot of time with the clients, but we did ask that they maintained a 10-minute-a-day practice. So this is the result of 10 minutes a day over about 8 weeks. There were some of the results that the participants had seen. So let's move into the Q&A. And I believe Maggie's going to come back on and give us some questions, and I will do my very best to answer them. And if you have any additional questions, as Maggie mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you can certainly type those into the question box and send them off.
Yep, that's exactly right. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to send those in now. I do have several that were submitted prior to the webinar, so I will start going through those. And thank you, Mary Beth, for that presentation and also for the practice session there at the end. That was great. So the first question we have here is, can you talk about some practical steps that leaders could take towards mindfulness? So I know we did the practice exercise and you talked about doing it in the morning. Is there anything else that people should keep in mind as they begin a daily practice of mindfulness?
Yep, for sure. There are so many things that we train with clients to work on, but just to keep it very simple for purposes today, I think one is the practice. 10 minutes a day. You can do more, that's fabulous, but at a minimum 10 minutes a day. Do your attention training. Number one, learn to take some pauses throughout the day. So, this is titled 1 Second Ahead. It's about finding that space. Don't be afraid to pause. Very much the key to mindful leadership is slowing down. And it's about slowing down so that you can speed up, so to speak, so that you have more focus, so that you have more clarity. So practice, pause, and also don't be afraid to plan how to get more mindfulness into your day. Those would be just some key, very simple techniques.
Great, thank you. So the next question that came in, and we also had a few come in on the line today with a similar theme, is so much of business is, quote, the future. How do we stay mindful when deadlines, milestones, goals, or events are bearing down on us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so, I think the deadlines, milestones, goals, that's really reflected in that paid reality that we talked about. And the key is really to be present in the moment, right? That present focus, that present attention is what builds effectiveness. So while we're working towards future results, it's the ability in the present moment to be as clear and focused as possible. That's the key. That's the key to future success.
Great, thank you. So the next question I think could be applied to a number of different industries, but we had this question come in. It says, I work in a very high-paced part of a university. How can I convince senior leadership that mindfulness matters?
Yep. Yeah, so I think, some people really understand mindfulness and they're behind it, they get it, they see the applications of it. Other people consider mindfulness, sort of something touchy-feely, flaky, new agey. And so when we go into companies, usually we go in with somebody that's really behind us, but there are people that need to be persuaded about that. So if this is something that you'd love to, convince your senior leadership team of, I'd say first and foremost, take them some research. There are tons of studies. We saw a few referenced in the context of mindfulness in a corporate environment can be very meaningful. There are many, many positive results that have come out of those. And, I'd encourage them to consider piloting a very small program and measuring the results themselves and just getting some firsthand experience with that. So research and maybe pilot a small program. And I'm happy, obviously, to come in and talk to anybody, or, I can certainly make reference to any number of practitioners of mindfulness and across the U.S. and across the world, actually.
That's great. Thank you. We've had a number of questions come in on the line related to this as well. Can you talk about the difference between mindfulness and meditation? Where's the distinction?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So mindfulness is obviously a meditative practice, but mindfulness specifically comes from the Buddhist Zen tradition, and it's about finding focus, as we apply it specifically about finding focus, relaxation, and clarity. And then those things, focus, relaxation, and clarity, have a lot of positive effects in the context of the work environment. Meditation, on the other hand, means a lot of different things to different people. And in addition to teaching mindfulness, I also teach meditation. And, meditation, there's different kinds of meditation. Meditations do a variety of different things. Mindfulness is what you're seeing most applied within the corporate setting because of its specificity to focus and clarity and the ability to combat stress through the relaxation piece. So it's a focused attention type of meditation.
That's great, thanks. We've had a couple of questions come in on the line. that actually specifically relate to the practice session we did. So the first question lets us know that somebody had trouble, staying focused on the counting down aspect of the exercise and found herself counting up frequently each time instead. Do you have any tips for how she might address that? And then secondly, we had another individual ask whether or not you would recommend background music or other calming methods during the mindfulness practice session each day.
Yeah, I had some mindfulness. So I used an app. That I use, which is called Insight Timer. So I chose some background music just to keep it engaged in terms of the webinar. It can be quite difficult for us to stay engaged in terms of staying present with the actual webinar format. But I like background music sometimes, and sometimes I don't. You might use, there's Rainfall. There's different apps out there that will absolutely help you. If you like that, and if you don't, sitting in silence is also good as well. And so, Maggie, repeat the first part of the question. Oh, the counting. That's right. I'm sorry. The counting, I'd say don't get too caught up in the counting down. I actually hate counting down. I do a much better job of counting up. I would try it for a while, maybe try it for a week, see what happens. And if going 1 through 10 and 1 through 10 and 1 through 10 is more effective for you and you'll be able to hold your focus there, then hold your focus there. That's the most important piece of it.
Okay, that's great. I hope that's helpful for those on the line as well. So we had a question just come in. It says, how do I personally balance my leadership counting on me to multitask with mindfulness and staying focused on one thing? So maybe you're not quite in a leadership position yourself, but you still want to implement mindfulness into your work.
Yeah, I think I would really push back on the multitasking piece. And I guess my question for you is, are they asking you specifically to multitask, or you're feeling like multitasking is the only natural response to the demands that you face? And again, we didn't go into the multitasking this time. We did last year, and I know that webinar is online. It's near the beginning. But I'd say push back in terms of the multitasking, and really, a lot of mindfulness in the practical workday is about setting boundaries. Right? It's hard to pause in the middle of the day, even if it's a 10-second pause, but it's hard to find that space to take a breath, and to when people are being asked to respond, or maybe the cultural expectation is to respond immediately to emails as they come in. So how are you finding focus if you're responding to emails as soon as they come in, because that's the expectation? But I'd say very much if you could push back a little bit on your leadership and have a conversation with them about the fact that multitasking has been proven not to be so effective, and for you that it's really pulling your attention in many different areas, and finding the ability to focus would be something that would allow you to be more effective.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions we had come in is, how can you use mindfulness if you've been out of the workforce or you're mid-career and having difficulty focusing on your job search efforts? How can this be applied to a person in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I do some career change work with some clients, and I think mindfulness has so many applications, right? And if we think back about that leadership model, it's about developing our self-awareness, most importantly. And the more self-aware you are, and the more focused attention that you have, the more self-management you have. So when you're thinking about a job search, self-awareness is key to knowing, what do you really want? What kind of job is most in alignment with your passions and your interests? Or are you sort of doing what you think you have to? So there's some of that, helping you get more clear on what's most relevant to you, as opposed to maybe what you've always done. And then there's that other piece in self-management, which is so important with job search, which is staying focused and moving forward on a day-to-day basis in terms of, actually staying engaged with the job search, which over time, job search can be the very hard thing to do, because, we're not leading a structured day anymore, and finding the energy specifically. You may have all the time in the world, but it's about finding the mental energy to stay focused on that. So, that right there, finding focus on anything will be built by the mindfulness practice. So self-awareness of what you want and self-management in terms of staying focused day to day.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you. I think we'll have time to ask maybe one more question that's come in on the line, and then for any others that we didn't get to, Mary Beth, would you be all right if we sent those over to you after
Absolutely.
the webinar today?
Yep, that would be great.
Great. So the last question then I'll ask, this comes in and says, is there any science behind the 10 minutes of practice? Would it be more impactful to do 2 or 3 15-minute sessions throughout the day? Is it the more the better, or is there no additional impact?
Oh, that's a great question. The more the better is my answer to that. There are a lot of studies. And I think the really fascinating studies for me, especially if you like the neuroscience piece of it, is when they've done studies that look at the brains of long-time mindfulness practitioners, long-time meditators like Buddhist monks. And the structure of their brains, the size of different parts of their brains are very different from the average human being. So the prefrontal cortex gets much bigger. That's where our cognitive thinking is, our executive functioning, and what gets smaller, the amygdala, where the emotional, that fear and flight response, the emotional reactivity come from gets smaller. So, to answer your question in terms of neuroscience and in terms of impact, from zero practice to maybe sitting for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, really significant impact on the size of the brain. But what's really fascinating for us in terms of just practical application to like a work environment where we're asking people to do it for 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day will have an impact on your focus, your clarity, your ability to deal with stress. 20, 40, and minutes, an hour a day, absolutely, you'll start to see significant shifts in those areas, as well as just much deeper ability to deal with stress, your clarity, your resilience, your overall well-being, your overall health. And there have been many, many, many studies, which if you're interested in seeing some of those, I have some slides that summarize studies. I'm happy to share those with you. So certainly the more the better is absolutely the key. And different people have different approaches to if they want to do 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes all at once, or whether they break that up into pieces. But 10 minutes is really about the minimum amount of time it takes to settle the mind and find a state of focus. So I'd say use that as your minimum.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And thank you again just for this entire presentation. This has been very informative and actually a great practice session, I think, for all of us. I'll also say many thanks to everyone for joining us for today's presentation. As a reminder, please do watch your email for an invitation to take a survey. Your feedback is crucial to helping us enhance our career programming for the future. Additionally, if you've enjoyed today's webinar, please do consider joining us online next week for the very first event in the new series called UChicago Connect. UChicago Connect will allow alumni to make real-time networking connections with one another online. You can find out more about the event at careers.uchicagoalumni.org, and we hope to see you there. So many thanks to everyone again. We will be sending out the recording in the next several business days. And thank you again, Mary Beth.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Have a great day, everybody.